No matter whether our country has experienced great booms or busts, in Mississippi, we've always been at the bottom. And so what that means is that we have to decide that we are going to rescue ourselves. That in places like Jackson, Mississippi, we won't allow it to become havens of oppression which endanger all of us. So what happens in Jackson, Mississippi impacts each and every one of us. And so we've made the decision that we're going to be the most radical city on the planet.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Left Out. My name is Dante Dallavalle and I'm joined by my co-hosts and colleagues,
Mike Palmieri
and Paul Sliker.
Well, we're back from the holiday break and the new year. We're bringing in 2018 pretty strong.
Yeah,
I feel like we got a strong list of guests coming through to you.
Hopefully everyone had a happy holidays and hopefully you didn't get into too many fights with your, conservative Uncle Harry across the Christmas dinner table.
Yeah.
Or maybe, hopefully you did get into a couple fights.
Yeah.
A little enlightenment.
Maybe you did. Hopefully, maybe you gave the best possible holiday gift you could give to any one of your friends, which is donating to our Patreon site in their name.
Exactly.
I know a lot of people get excited when people do that, and that that's a big thing in my family.
For sure. I mean, it's in all seriousness, we want to thank everybody that's been contributing to our Patreon, that's been asking questions, and that's been really engaged with this podcast. And moving forward, we just want to let you know again that we do have this Patreon account, and that it really helps enormously when people like yourselves contribute and engage with us and move this dialogue forward.
Absolutely.
So what's this episode about?
Yeah, so Dante, you weren't there for the interview,
I wasn't,
but you're here for the introduction. That's okay. It was a really amazing interview. It's actually one of our first with someone who's active, working on the ground in grassroots movements around building a cooperative, locally based economy.
In this episode, we had the good fortune of being able to sit down live in New York with Kali Akuno, who's the co-director and co-founder of Cooperation Jackson, which is a pretty unbelievable network of worker cooperatives down in Jackson, Mississippi, a place that is one of the most impoverished cities in the U.S.
Mm-hmm. And in the Deep South.
He recently came out with a book called Jackson Rising, The Struggle for Economic Democracy and Black Self-Determination in Jackson, Mississippi. We dive into a little bit about the book and then, a little bit more about exactly what they're doing down in Cooperation Jackson, what sort of cooperatives they're creating, and a little bit more generally about politics and sort of a way forward and how they can use the sort of message and platform of economic democracy to find a better solution.
Yeah, absolutely. Kali was very generous with his time, and he actually came up to do an event with the New York Democracy at Work chapter, where he sat on a panel of a bunch of other great thinkers on the topic of cooperatives and their possibilities, both economic and political. So the whole night was great. Really enjoyed it, and we hope you enjoy the episode too.
So without further ado, here's Kali Akuno of Cooperation Jackson. We hope you enjoy this episode of Left Out.
So Kali Akuno, welcome to Left Out. Kali is the co-founder and co-director of Cooperation Jackson and the author of Jackson Rising, The Struggle for Economic Democracy, Socialism, and Black Self-Determination in Jackson, Mississippi. Kali, a lot of our listeners will be vaguely familiar with Cooperation Jackson. Democracy at Work, which hosts this podcast, is dedicated to the advancement of economic democracy and worker cooperatives, and I'm sure have heard at least the name Cooperation Jackson or have stumbled upon some articles about it. But can you give a quick intro for us on sort of in your own simplistic words, what Cooperation Jackson is, and maybe just a basic introduction on what its vision is.
Well, briefly, I mean, the standard spiel is that we are an emerging network of worker cooperatives and supporting solidarity economy institutions. That's the simple way of saying, we are an instrument which is trying to create these instruments in Jackson because they don't already exist or they don't exist in a formal way. So before Cooperation Jackson, outside of credit unions, there were only 2 cooperatives in town. Rainbow, which is almost 37-year-old, now struggling, unfortunately, grocery cooperative, which has been in town basically since 1980, and then a small kind of computer repair co-op tied to Rainbow. And that was basically it. Now, the city is home to the offices of the Mississippi Association of Cooperatives, MAC. Their headquarters are, right in the middle of downtown Jackson, and MAC is the Mississippi entity which serves as a representative of the Federation of Southern Cooperatives, which is a largely but not exclusively Black network of cooperatives that exists, throughout the South, and it's coming up on its 50th anniversary in 2018. So they've been around for a minute. So that's part of the body of work that we both have emerged from and which we're standing upon. Now, what makes us a little bit different is that we are concentrating from most of what MAC is doing. For instance, most of theirs are either credit unions, a few utility co-ops, which are big in the South, even though they don't function as co-ops, most of them. They just have that name. But the vast majority of them are, agricultural co-ops. And that's the vast majority of the co-ops that exist pretty much throughout the South. So our major
intuitively makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, so our major kind of innovation, if you would, is to bring this into an urban environment, in an urban context, which has been tried before in this struggle. So anybody who checks out Jessica Gordon Imhard's book, Collective Courage, will know that there's been many attempts in Memphis. I'm just going to cite some that have been close to us: Memphis, even Jackson, New Orleans, over different periods of time. So, different conditions have led to different challenges, and we have conditions, that are challenging for us, but also some opportunities. So, a deeper question, though, about what Cooperation Jackson is, or a deeper answer, we were created very explicitly to be the vehicle to start developing the capacity of the workers in our city, in our environment, to do the work of controlling and developing the productive forces, to build the solidarity economy within the strategy that we call the Jackson-Cush Plan. So we are a vehicle of that plan, basically, and that's a critical thing that folks, I think should know, that we are one part of a whole, right? And you can't just look at us. I think to understand the overall strategy, you can't just look at us in isolation. I think that would lead you actually in a dead end. But to understand us in relationship to a broader project of social transformation as being, implemented as best we can, with some successes and some challenges. Those two come together. So Cooperation Jackson is an entity to specifically move that particular plank of the strategy. And the strategy, just in short, is about building autonomous people's powers through people assembly, exercising independent political activity, which includes electoral politics, but also far beyond that, and then developing the solidarity economy. Like those 3 pillars working together in conjunction with each other. That is the overall Jackson-Cush Plan, and the objective, without question, without fail, without compromise is, we first want to establish a solid base of power in Jackson, Mississippi, extend that into the Black Belt region of the state, which we call the Kush District, and then from there take over the state. So that's what we're aiming for. That's what we're working towards, and we don't see it as, it's not a short-term strategy. We're talking 20 to 25 years of very concerted point just to get us to a place of saying that we aim to constitute a political majority that can then exercise democratic power within the state of Mississippi and try to transform the state of Mississippi to be something that enables the transformation of the United States. So we ain't just Mississippi limited. It's just we starting where we at.
You even in reference to the Jackson Kush plan, it kind of gets to this question of history, right? And the work that Cooperation Jackson is doing, you always emphasize rests on a long arc of decades and decades of struggle, either whether it be the 1970s or even the late 1940s, or you could even go right all the way further back from what the South is. Can you talk a little bit about that? It's mentioned early on in the book, kind of set the stage of really that this is just one point on an arc, and it's going to continue to bend, right, even towards the future. So if you could speak to that, I think that would help a lot of people see it's not just this one thing, right?
No, it's not just one thing, and it's not just kind of like one episode. I think that the difference is that we've just tried to really hone in over the past, what is it now, going on 16 years since September 11th, which was a major point of transition for us, of learning from our history and trying to really learn, most importantly, from our mistakes. You can just focus on the little victories or the little successes. It actually, in my view, I think it actually doesn't teach you that much, right? Because you can just I did this and that enabled me to accomplish X, Y, and Z, when what may have actually got you to where you were was a lot of luck. Actually good timing, as opposed to you did something far more remarkably different than you did another time before, right? And I can speak to that of at different times putting less energy into something and less focus into something, but having it work and be like, this was the right, I got the right formula, when actually no, that was the right time, right? But the critical thing is being prepared for whenever an opportunity emerges, that we have the pieces and all the components that we need to seize the opportunity. That's something I think the left has been sorely lacking for quite some time now. But that said, we studied in detail for a long period of time cooperatives. That's something just to have the audience know. I started studying Mondragon when I was in high school, and this was in the 80s, right? Just trying to get a sense of what was going on. And the first co-op I ever developed was actually in California, in Sacramento, California. The Thomas Moss Memorial Co-op was the name of that. And it was me and a couple of folks from the community that I was working in, and some college buddies, my roommates, basically. We had a small little political organization on campus, and we didn't know what the hell that we were doing. We just we liked co-ops as a term. We thought it was something that can do X, Y, and Z, and we created an entity, and we created some programs, and it failed miserably. It had about like a 2-year stretch, but we really didn't know anything about actually running a business. And we didn't really study how do you actually run a basic business. And I mean stuff like, do you keep accurate books? What I'm saying? Do you have an inventory system? What's going in? What's going out? How much did you pay? Did you pay more than you made? Just basic stuff. We were just like, this is for the community, and we were just draining money out of our own pockets and not really focusing on actually got to produce something, you actually got to sell something. So we learned. But that's one of the things, if I hadn't had that failure, I wouldn't have been able to, pick up to, some years later and be like, I did this wrong. And I'm not going to repeat that.
And that's the thing that's not just specific to co-ops, right?
No.
All business owners or entrepreneurs.
So that history, I think, the critical piece is learning from all that. Being in a collective process is also an important thing, because you can't study everything by yourself. You can't digest all the history, by yourself. So, having some clear division of labor within the groups that you're working in, I think, is a critical piece that we try to digest. Now, most people might listen and be like, well, you're not actually talking about history. Well, actually, I am. It's the process of how, you form an organizing core and you divide your labor up so that you can be effective in implementing a program. And that is the basis, I think, of the practical history that I know I want to impart to and try to inspire whoever's listening to this to start forming a cooperation, whatever, wherever you're at, Cooperation North or, whatever the situation is, right? Is the practical experience of assimilating the lessons from history. And for us, we were studying elements around Du Bois' work around why he was promoting cooperatives. We did an intense study between 2004 and 2007 within the Malcolm X grassroots movement, preparing to launch something like Cooperation Jackson, right? So the thought behind Cooperation Jackson, I would say, really starts in 2004. We didn't create Cooperation Jackson to 2014. So that's you're talking about a 10-year period, right? And sometimes, I would get frustrated about, well, it's taking us too long to do this or to do that. But looking at it back in hindsight, that was probably one of the better things that we did, was to take some time to do that intensive study, because I think it enabled us to see certain pitfalls within how cooperatives are built and practiced in the United States. So we said, well, we don't want to do that, right? We don't want to build something that's just going to enable displacement or gentrification, which a lot of cooperatives are actually vehicles of because of their kind of class orientation, or at least the class orientation of people who construct them. And they construct them more to kind of meet certain basic needs of their lifestyle. They're not constructing it as a means to actually produce to transform society. Let me put it that way. That's not their aim, and it's not the mission. And for us, it was like, well, if that's our aim and mission, how does this suit that purpose? And what parts of it will work and what parts of it don't? And we're still experimenting with that in some profound ways, and we've actually put some very specific challenges into our model of trying to be ecologically sound. That also comes from a deep understanding of trying to study history, and that's a deep history of capitalism, not just a deep history of cooperatives, right? But how capitalism has actually profoundly enhanced the productive forces of all of humanity, but at what cost? See, there's been some great costs. Costs of, slavery, racism, patriarchy. These are all external costs. Environment was where I was going to.
Kind of unending war.
Yeah, like unending war. So these are things of history, or how do we correct that? Because I want, one of the things that's produced the ability to eliminate scarcity. That's a positive in history. But I don't want to do it at such a rate that, there is no planet for my grandchildren to live on 200 years from now. So what's the balance? How do I find that balance? And we're only going to figure that out through experimentation.
You have a newly elected mayor, Chokwe Antara Lumumba, whose vision is to, quote, encourage the development of cooperative businesses and make Jackson the most radical city on the planet. No easy feat in the conservative-controlled state of Mississippi. Because of real estate and various capitalist economic development initiatives that you mentioned in the book, based on deductions from the last two municipal elections there, that you basically have to keep the black working class population roughly somewhere above 70% to make sure that it's possible for someone with this type of politics to get elected again. So explain the relationship between Cooperation Jackson, its radical municipal politics, and its relationship with the government or the state, and the need also for a radical political consciousness and movement in the working class of Jackson. And why is that whole recipe sort of crucial for coming together to make sure what you're doing in Jackson is a success?
Well, let's make this clear. Number one, we have no relationship with the federal government, none whatsoever. The only extent that we have a relationship, with the state government is to primarily pay taxes, and just keep them off our backs.
Right.
So the relationship that we've been intentional about crafting is one with the county, which is Hinds County, and one with the municipal government, the city of Jackson. And we've been very explicit around promoting cooperatives as a solution, right, and trying to get forces, any and all force, somebody who's aspiring to political office, let's put it that way, to adopt this vision. So it's not just Chokwe, Antar.
Right.
Because the thing that we are trying to make is that this is a condition of politics and political life in our community. And that if you want legitimacy, if you want some votes, you got to swing this way. Because we built a level of political consciousness and a level of political consensus that this is the route that we want to go. Because we think ultimately if co-ops just remain a part of the political project, say of a Malcolm X grassroots movement, then we're not actually doing our job. We need it to be something that the community sees as a benefit and is taking up on its own terms. And that may be moving in a direction that we may not necessarily always inherently agree to. But what we're trying to do is change the norms of how people see productive relationships in a society being organized. Right? To me, that's the point where it moves towards politics, towards actual systems change. Right? And that's the critical piece of what we've been pushing and trying to encourage everybody. We don't need to be the only entity in Jackson doing or developing co-ops. Everybody should take this up. Now, we're going to struggle with you about doing it, right? And doing it in a politically kind of coherent way. So that's there. But the critical thing, I should say, just so folks are clear, the original strategy that within the Jackson Kush plan as relates to co-ops, the initial thought was, number one, we would elect Chokwe, this is Chokwe Senior, for lack of a better term. We would elect Chokwe, and then we would focus on creating, shifting the policy framework within the municipality that would enable cooperatives to have more entree into anchor institutions, let's call them. Sometimes I like that term. Other reasons I don't.
Yeah, right. Certain things that couldn't be an anchor, and it's another name for something else.
Right. So we wanted that to change the rules around procurement, particularly within the government framework around how they do contracting. And then more importantly, we wanted to create a fund to help support the incubation and the capitalization of cooperatives. And the reason being, understanding the local political economy, there's only really one or two credit unions that either have the capital or the political interest in actually supporting cooperatives. And Mississippi banking laws are very restrictive, very, very archaic, and are that way on purpose. So we don't have a lot of the big national, international banks that operate in Mississippi. They're
it's
actually
hard
excluded.
to get capital for cooperatives anywhere, but
it's very hard,
particularly in Jackson.
And then it's not just because the capital is. So one is that you don't have the concentration of capital. That's one. Two, the capital that is concentrated there is heavily vested in perpetuating the racial order. So they ain't going. They are not going to give no loans. Kind of to poor working class people, even if they pull their resources together, because the first thing they're going to ask for, what assets you have? I don't have any. Well, show me your work employment, record, and they see somebody might have a felony or something. I'm not giving you anything, and it only rationalizes their racism to a certain extent. So you're already excluded on so many different levels. So us knowing that was like, look, we're not going to get around capital at this stage of the game. How do we translate political power into access to capital? That was a critical piece. And saying, can we move the city government to move some money or set aside some money to help start a capitalization fund? So when I worked for Chokwe, it was specifically to execute this part of that strategy. So when I was the director of special projects, that was one of the main things that was on my task, and the primary thing that I was trying to do, and it was a challenge, was to get the city to earmark $3 million that it would hold per year, like in a reserve fund. Sure. And then was trying to organize the different credit unions to put in matching funds to that. So we would have like a $6 million pool, and then create a kind of quasi-governmental organization with some of their board members on it that would manage how this would go. And then that would be a direct line that co-ops could have within the city
for like grants,
for grants and capital, like both, right?
Low interest loans,
right? Low interest loans. So that was a critical piece, because it's like we know the limited amount of resources that exist within our city. If folks want to really scale up and do something, they're gonna have to have some money. You want to, like in our case, one of the cooperatives that we have is the Green Team, and to this point, it had been the most capitalized, co-op that we had developed. And it started off with roughly about $45,000 worth of equipment, in terms of trucks and tractors and things like that, so they could really do to scale what they wanted to do. And that was just like a starting point. And most of those folks, with the exception of one, no credit, terrible credit, prior records, ain't nobody giving them no money. So we had to set it up internally where Cooperation Jackson is the vehicle, which basically gave them this $45,000, small loan. And then their obligation basically to the co-op is, you set the business up so that you pay that back, so that somebody else can use it down the road.
Kind of like a revolving loan
fund. Yeah. So we kind of have our own internal operation of doing that, right? So that was a key piece, and we still want and need the local government to do that.
Yeah.
Now the challenge is, and this is where the larger politics come into play. Jackson is broke. The city of Jackson is broke right now. I mean, it's barely making budget, and it's making budget in part because the Antar's administration did a work freeze and hiring no new folks. So folks are clear when I mean hiring no new employees, particularly in public works, and then raise the property taxes. And I was personally, against these two measures. I understood
very unpopular at any local level.
Right. I knew why he did them, and why he felt, and we kind of saw that coming. Why he felt he had to do it. But it speaks to a larger piece of the state of Mississippi basically enacted what the Republicans are about to approve of today. In terms of a major tax cut in Mississippi. They did that 2 years ago, and they actually did an earlier version of it 4 years ago. And so the state of Mississippi is broke, seriously broke. So the actual resources, to try to do something different are very limited, and it puts you strictly in a dynamic where the only way you can get any access to capital is to go to private capital markets, which we know in Mississippi are not going to give to us, right? And so, but we got to recognize it's like the folks who are pushing this program, they ain't stupid. They're ideologically driven, and they are on a mission to basically destroy the government as an instrument that does some level of social protection, social security. They have a specific mission to eliminate that, and all they want left is a police force that basically mediates contracts. Yeah. That's all they want. Yeah. So public education, anything public they're trying to destroy. So we are now in our dynamic of we know that we could still get support from the city council and the administration to do one part of that two-part strategy, which is actually change some of the procurement and the policy pieces that would support cooperatives, and we're still going to push for that. But being able to access resources from that entity, in this case the municipal government, we know it's going to be very limited. And so we have an extra burden of trying to figure out, and an extra challenge, and I see it more as a challenge and an opportunity on a certain level to do a broader program of transformation. It's saying, okay, here's a challenge, here's a limitation, but it actually, in a certain sense, opens up a door for us if we look at it in a particular way. And the door is, it gives you a whole bunch of space to do things that you wouldn't normally do because you now have to do it, right? So for us, we're trying to explore, can we move the city to adopt an actual alternative currency? Right? Can we do that? Because, we can still exchange and create value on our own through the solidarity economy, right? So it's a different way of organizing. It's like people still got.
Well, they're doing this in Wisconsin somewhere, right?
A lot of different places.
Right.
But our thing is like, look, we can say that we broke, and within the logic of capital, we are. But we still got land, we still got people, we still got time, we still got energy.
Well, and to back up a little
and unused equipment, I'm sure, laying around.
Tons of it laying around. So it's do we have the political will to put it to use? That becomes the question.
And to more of that broader transformation, explain a little bit more about, because I think this would be fascinating for people who are listening all over the country. Explain more about the Fortification line. I mean, basically, going beyond co-ops, you guys are trying to buy up
as much
as you possibly can to the former point that we touched on, to keep the people in the community there, to allow them to stay in the community, and keep that population, as you mentioned in the book, above 70%. Obviously, people all over the states are fighting with gentrification. Explain a little bit more about what you're doing there with community land trusts and all these sorts of things.
Well, this is where the history comes in. Again, going back to history, and us looking around and studying where have we defeated gentrification in any major, predominantly black or Latino city in the United States. And you look around and you see basically none, which does not bode well, right? But there are different places where some practices have held true in at least directing the flow of energy, the flow of resources in certain neighborhoods. We studied some stuff in Chicago, we studied some stuff in Detroit. To that end, I was involved in a somewhat failed experiment in Oakland, California. So there's direct experience, and then there's studying other people's experience. So the thing that you correctly cite, there's a political calculus that both sides of the equation know, and that the population demographics in Jackson are such, because of the very vivid, visceral, in-your-face form of white supremacy that exists in Mississippi, which you're all now starting to get a taste of from 45. So welcome to welcome to Mississippi.
Welcome to America.
Yeah, welcome to Mississippi. Welcome to America. That shapes consciousness, in and of itself. So there's a certain level of work that I just don't have to do, because the conditions are already doing that, right? So I don't have to. I have a benefit, I think sometimes, living in a lot of different places, it makes a difference of whether I have to convince somebody that they have a class enemy. Like, if you already know that, you're very clear on that, then I can start organizing you at a different point. Yeah. Right? But if I got to convince you, then you kind of always, maybe he's exaggerating, maybe he's lying. Yeah. Then there's second guessing. Well, maybe we can collaborate with these people and we can cut a deal with them. They're just good, fun-loving people, just like us, but they own everything. So, how does that match up? Compared to organizing, say, like in Oakland, I love that Mississippi. You know, I've always loved it. For all the years I've come in and out, lived there a short period of time, lived there a long period of time. There's certain things I just don't have to convince nobody of. It's like, you're already telling me what I already know. The question is, what are we going to do about it? So that's a different point of starting the conversation, which is more about a program.
When we did one of our first episodes this season, we sat down with David Harvey, and he had a story. I think for a while he was teaching Marx in prison.
Right.
And on the first day they said, why do we have to read a 1,000-page book? I already get it. What are you telling me right now? You know,
I know that already.
It really is kind of like, it's funny when we talk about the working class. If you're working, you get it. You don't have to be. You don't have to call it that necessarily. You already get.
Yeah, so folks are like,
the conditions of your life, right?
Spare me the lecture. Yeah, please. What we gonna do? Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Like, get to the program.
Ready for the action.
Yeah, what we gonna do?
Yeah.
You know, does that make sense? You know, so in that regard, you know, we have some advantages in our area, but the disadvantages are, you know, is in a world dominated by capital, we capital poor. So right after Hurricane Katrina, just to go back and share some history, because I think it's important around how this piece came together. Haley Barbour, who was then the governor, you know, was good friends with the Bush family and their whole, you know, legacy, and they share, you know, some common interest in being involved in the petrochemical industry, and their families going back being involved in that. And you know, he was the governor during Hurricane Katrina, and he was the one who skillfully, but also, you know, just through those relationships, he managed to get Mississippi to access more federal funds for Katrina disaster relief than Louisiana got, right? Which had basically 70% of the damage was in Louisiana. Now, Mississippi got its fair share, Alabama got some, and so did Texas. But nothing in comparison to what Louisiana got. But because of politics and because of, you know, his own skillful maneuvering, he's a skillful politician, he wound up accessing those funds. He then took a significant chunk of those funds and earmarked them for the development of a medical corridor, right?
Yeah, which you talk about extensively in the book.
Yeah, so he tweaked that in such a way to be like, oh, this is hurricane relief, blah, 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 blah. It helps when you have a legislative supermajority, and they will just sign off on whatever you want through. So there's also that. But, you know, they set up this medical corridor expansion. They use eminent domain to, you know, then seize a bunch of property right smack dab in the middle of town. And they've been set on doing this medical corridor expansion. Now, that's the public side of this, and we know private markets generally respond, you know, most avidly when there's a bunch of public money.
So that's when the real estate
about to be given away. Right. That's when they know there's some money to be spent. Like the government's about to be spending some money. They're gonna be giving to me. Yeah. I'm gonna develop this area. So the past 10 years, there's been, you know, in two neighborhoods in Jackson in particular, they've been buying up the houses. And so the end line of where they've been concentrating to the south, where they've been concentrating there, buying up this property, is a street called Fortification. And we have said, look, they haven't gone too much further south of there. We have to stop them from going further south, because just the displacement of those two neighborhoods will probably reduce the black working class population by about 3 to 5% per our calculations. When you look at it and you recognize that that's the major engine, that's where most of the money is concentrated, but it's not the only one. So they got some other plans along the way, because they know they can't knock out the black working class population in one fell swoop, you know, not without some other major drastic action. Sure. So it's like, how do you chip away? But they first have to get a solid foothold to establish the new dynamic. And so the medical corridor is that new dynamic. Now, somewhat thankfully, football is a major religion in the South. And the thing that has stopped this medical corridor from really advancing over the past 10 years is that there's a football stadium right in the middle of the property that they did the eminent domain. Now, the state owns it already, but the issue is they can't tear it down without replacing it and allowing the team that uses it, which is Jackson State University, to have another football stadium. In part, this is where the racism comes in as a block on capitalism, because there's other places that they can stay, but they don't want them in white neighborhoods, straight up. So it's like, we're going to keep y'all here until we can figure something else out. Now, in the course of that time, they've been fighting about where, amongst themselves primarily, where we're going to put this new stadium and what type of stadium is it, right? And so JSU, its former president, she was making a very strong case, I want a dome stadium. She got some alliance with a sector of our local capital vested in the downtown interests. They also wanted a dome stadium, right? The governor, however, does not, or he did not. And his reasoning was, Ole Miss didn't have a dome stadium. Why in the hell am I going to give Jackson State one? Right? Yeah. So, like, how their own logic defeat them at different times, and how we have to understand the differences and contradictions and play them up, which we did a lot, right? Best we could to kind of keep them divided. And it was like, the longer we can keep them divided, the more time it gives us, right? Yeah. So that has kind of put their project on stall. They've been buying up homes X, Y, and Z, but it's given us enough time to amass a little resources here and start buying up property below that state line. Below that fortification line. And so, our intent, we're trying to, the couple of different things we're trying to do all simultaneously. One, we're trying to change our relationship with the land. That's an important piece. And, within particularly American capitalism and how it's developed, land speculation has been a big driving engine from the beginning, from Jamestown being established and what that was all like. That's been there. Speculation. First it was in London, now it's here in New York. But that's been a big part of it. So how do we change that dynamic and change people's relationship with land and with the earth? Our big thing is we're going to take it off the market and decommodify it as much as we possibly can within the legal edifice that exists, which right now is a community land trust. So it's like we're going to use the legal structure for what it is, but then try to take it further and create a truly democratic institution in the community that actually manages this as a commons. So that's a big piece of, what we're trying to learn and trying to develop, right? But the other piece is to preserve the political character of the community, because, if we lose the political character of the community, it transforms the whole project. Not just Cooperation Jackson, but it transforms the whole project. So it's very essential for us that we keep the community that's there, right? And, we don't want to do development in some way that's going to force people out. And if we're not careful, because we already see some of this, how just capitalism is so, and see how it works, that our activity is also fueled some speculation itself. Just because we've bought a little bit of land and we cleaned it up, put up, some farms on it. Now some other people are like, oh, there's something going on in that neighborhood. Why don't we buy the things that we don't have the money to buy? So there's that dynamic. But the critical piece around developing the community land trust, first and foremost, is to stop the gentrification as much as we can, keep the community in place, keep the political dynamics in place, and buy ourselves enough time and space to experiment with new social relationships. That's what we're really trying to do there. And we actually made that in some part in our beginning a priority. Because the resources that we've been able to save, the resources we've been able to generate, and the resources we've been able to kind of secure some resources from grants here and there, we've made like buying land and condition with folks. Well, we don't, a lot of grants, oh, you can't do that. We say, well, we don't need your money because this is what, if you want to help us, this is what we need the money to do. And we've made some very tough decisions, over the course of 4 years that we're gonna spend more money doing that than we are going like paying people to run the piece, and people have to, basically volunteer. Cooperation Jackson don't exist without extensive volunteer hours. So people looking to understand our model and what it takes, we always try to be real with folks. There's a certain level of exploitation that you're just going to have to commit to if you at least want to follow the path of how we've done it. And we think the reward in the long term, would definitely outweigh the short-term sacrifices. But I think you got to have a clear end goal in mind of where you want to go and why you're making these sacrifices. That's a critical piece.
I was going to actually ask, too, for you. I know on the website you list a bunch of things that you guys need and help that you want and how to reach. If you could just do that for anyone who's listening right now, who might be thinking, hey, I have tools, or I'm a lawyer, or I'm good at writing grants, whatever. How do they get to you guys? How do they cooperation, Jack?
How do you support cooperation? The biggest thing that we need right now is some financial support for the community production initiative. That's the main thing that we need. We're also going to need some support developing some new legal instruments to protect that work. So if you got legal skills and you know a little bit about technology, contact us. And we also want to be in a broader dialogue and need some help exploring the development of a local cryptocurrency. So that's something that we're trying to look at. So folks who know how to do that, like that type of programming, give us a ring. You can email us at cooperationjackson@gmail.com or hit me at Kali Akuno at gmail.com.
We'll put all these links.
So those are the two most immediate things that we need. And then long term, we're looking to create a federal, level network, nationwide network that is not just about developing cooperatives, but cooperatives with clear political missions. And that's a distinction I think we make for some of the other things. Is that we're not just Cooperation Jackson is not just into making cooperatives for cooperative's sake. We want them to help fortify projects that are about human emancipation and liberation. So,
and then if you don't have any skills or money, stop Facebooking about Trump and
get busy,
get the word out there about cooperation.
And folks can come down and volunteer. We always got plenty of things of work to do. And more extensive conversations, just come check us out. And
maybe we should make a trip in the summer. I think so. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah.
I think so. I wouldn't mind
That'll work.
down there. Well, we need to do a follow-up interview because there's so many other things that we wanted to touch on, but we didn't get the chance to. This is great. Appreciate it, man.
Part one.
Part one. Hey, Kali Akuno, thanks for joining Left Out. We got to get you down the hall now so you can speak more.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
So thank you for tuning in to another edition of Left Out. Again, special thanks to Kali Akuno and Cooperation Jackson for sitting down, speaking with us, and for coming all the way up to New York to spend a few days with our Democracy at Work New York chapter. It was a really special event. Definitely check out his book. Again, that's Jackson Rising, The Struggle for Economic Democracy and Black Self-Determination in Jackson, Mississippi.
Also, big thanks, as always, to our audio engineer, Corey Morgart, and to Democracy at Work, and of course to all of you who make this endeavor possible and enjoyable. Again, please support us any way that you can. $1, yeah, please, just $1 on Patreon.
Perhaps two.
Maybe two, maybe three. Everything goes a long way. It helps pay for the production cost, the travel expense, and we really appreciate anything that comes in. Of course, you can also rate and review the podcast or engage with us on social media. We're on Twitter now, please. At Left Out Podcast.
Yeah, our next episode is with Professor Steve Keen. Professor Steve Keen is not your typical economist. He's actually, I think he refers to himself as the anti-economist, which is really interesting. He was the first person to accurately predict the 2007-2008 financial crisis way back in 2005. So you want to listen to that episode and learn a little bit about what might be coming next.
Yeah, we're pretty excited to do that interview.
Really awesome episode. So thanks again for all of your support, and we hope you enjoyed this episode of Left Out.